Hey guys, tonight we begin with something a little darker. A time of leeches, hallucinations and ointments that smell like soup left in the sun. We're diving into the murky, oozing world of medieval skincare, but not the hydrating, gentle kind. No, we're talking about face creams made from narcotics, poultices that ferment in your pores, and herbal brews so potent they could sedate a donkey. So before we start hallucinating, let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always a trip seeing who else is up listening to this madness. Now dim the lights, fluff that suspiciously lumpy pillow, and let your mind drift back. Because tonight, you're not scrolling through skincare TikToks. You're waking up in the year 1325 with something cold, sticky, and possibly narcotics smeared across your face. Congratulations, you've just been diagnosed with pale face syndrome. The medieval solution? Drugs. All of them. At once. You're hunched over a cracked wooden table in a candlelit hovel that smells like a damp garden and bad decisions. Your reflection stares back from a shard of polished tin, and you don't love what you see. Skin's too red, eyes too dull, lips too dry. Fortunately, there's a remedy for all of that. Unfortunately, it's in the form of a paste made from mashed poppies, stale wine, and what might be pig marrow. You scoop it up with your fingers. It's warm. Not because it was heated. It's just been sitting too close to the fire for a few days. You smear it on your cheeks anyway. There's a tingling sensation, then a burning one. Then you start seeing colours that definitely aren't part of the candlelight, and that means it's working. In medieval Europe, beauty treatments were less about looking good and more about surviving the treatment. Most remedies doubled as recreational drugs. Face masks included ingredients like opium, henbane, belladonna, and mandrake, all of which were either hallucinogenic, poisonous, or both. These weren't beauty products. They were time bombs in a ceramic jar. Belladonna, also known as deadly nightshade, was used to dilate pupils and make your eyes look wide and mysterious. Side effects included blindness, confusion, and occasionally talking to the Virgin Mary through your soup. Mandrake root, soaked in wine and mashed into a paste, was considered excellent for skin smoothing, and also excellent for full body paralysis if you use too much. And you always use too much. You're trying not to blink as the ointment tightens. The mixture is drying into a crusty, cracked mosaic across your face. Your lips feel numb. Your nose is twitching. You think you hear music in the distance, but it's probably just the poppies hitting your bloodstream. Either way, you've got at least 6 hours before you can safely move your eyebrows again. But you're not done yet. Time for the bath soak. You stumble outside to the communal wash tub. A barrel full of steeped herbs, rainwater, and possibly someone else's leg rash. The healer said it was cleansing, which in medieval terms means, let's see what happens. The bath includes wormwood, lavender, and a generous splash of spoiled wine. You lower yourself in, your pores open, so does your imagination. At some point you start giggling uncontrollably. At another, you think you see a floating nun. Still totally normal. This was the routine. And now your skin is red, blotchy, and smells like you fell asleep in a salad. The solution? Bread mould. Yes, actual mould. From old bread. It's applied like a spot treatment for blemishes, boils, or anything that looks angry. It turns out mould has antibacterial properties, something medieval people didn't understand but were more than happy to exploit by accident. You slap it on, ignore the squish, and hope no one notices the bread is also attracting flies. And don't forget the makeup. For that desirable pale look, women powdered their faces with mixtures of white lead and vinegar. It gave you that porcelain doll effect, right up until it corroded your flesh. The longer you used it, the worse your skin got. The worse your skin got, the more you needed it. Welcome to the first known case of toxic beauty addiction, now with a side of early death. You stare back at your reflection. One eye is dilated, the other is twitching. Your cheeks look sunken, but kind of fashionable. You smell like medicinal cheese. It's unclear if your skincare routine is helping, or slowly turning you into a ghost. But hey, your skin is glowing. Possibly from fever, possibly from the belladonna, And just when you think it can't get worse, someone hands you a lip plumper. It's a thick salve made of crushed beetles, mint and trace amounts of mercury. You dab it on. The sting is immediate. Your lips swell. Not with youth, but with inflammation. You now look like you've been punched in the face by a basilisk. This is beauty. This is glamour. This is you, in medieval Europe, trying to look cute while casually microdosing your way into a coma. And as the candle flickers beside your bed of straw, you lie back, face crusted with narcotic sludge, mouth gently buzzing from insect venom, and you wonder, did it work? You can't feel your teeth, so probably. But if you think that was the worst thing medieval medicine did to your skin, wait until you hear what they used to pluck their eyebrows. Because next up, we're diving headfirst into hot coals, fish guts, and the ancient art of facial waxing with tree sap and terror. There is a fire in your mouth. Or maybe it's just the tooth, the one that's been throbbing since yesterday, swollen and black around the gum line, leaking something that tastes like fermented gravy. You haven't slept, you haven't eaten, and now, after trying to swish your mouth with weak wine and muttering at a prayer stone for 2 hours, you've decided it's time for medicine. Which in the Middle Ages is a phrase that should fill you with dread. The local healer offers you 2 choices. 1, a concoction of herbs, boiled in goat milk and blessed by someone with questionable hygiene and a rattling cough. Or 2, you can go with the strong stuff. A warm, syrupy elixir laced with powdered mandrake, dried henbane, a touch of ground opium, and a sprig of mint for freshness. It's the medieval version of a morphine smoothie, except it's served in a reused sheep bladder and comes with a 50% chance of either euphoria or hallucinating a talking cabbage. You choose the strong stuff, and it hits fast. By the time you stagger back to your sleeping mat, the pain is no longer your main concern. You're now unsure if your arms are still attached. A priest is whispering about demons, or maybe that's just your own breathing. Either way, the good news is you're not worried about the tooth anymore. The bad news is you may have just forgotten how to blink. Medieval pain relief was never about healing. It was about distraction. If the treatment knocked you unconscious, then congratulations, it worked. If it caused nausea, seizures, or accidental visions of a glowing saint wearing sandals made of moss, that was just an added bonus. Drugs weren't classified the way they are now. There were no warning labels or dosage charts. The closest thing to safe was simply not dying during the application. By the 12th century, poppy juice was a common ingredient in medieval apothecaries. Known as the milk of the poppy, it was used to treat everything from migraines to the emotional trauma of seeing a medieval doctor's toolkit. It was usually mixed with wine, honey or vinegar, and rubbed on wounds, poured into ears, or simply chugged like a cursed smoothie. The more pain you were in, the more you drank. And the more you drank, the more your liver shriveled into a raisin. Some monasteries began cultivating poppies in large gardens under the guise of healing. But by healing, they mostly meant sedating the sick until they either got better or became incredibly chill about dying. Not all remedies were drinkable. Pain salves were popular among the wealthy, who could afford imported ingredients. These balms often contained hemlock, arsenic, or powdered snake parts, rubbed directly onto aching joints or surgical wounds. If you felt a tingle, that meant it was absorbing. If your arm started twitching uncontrollably, that meant you probably had 2 hours to live. Again, still better than the pain. In battlefield surgery, the go-to method of numbing a limb before amputation was to get the patient extremely drunk, then blow henbane smoke into their face. Henbane, a powerful hallucinogen, caused dry mouth, dilated pupils, muscle spasms, and intense visions. It also dulled pain. But it came with a trade-off. You might not remember the sore entering your leg, but you'd definitely spend the next week convinced your bed was full of spiders reciting the Lord's Prayer. You try to sit up, but your limbs feel like boiled cabbage. The healer leans over you again, this time with a hot iron poker. Apparently it's time for cauterization. Not to worry though, they've brought another painkiller to help ease the process. It's called Dwale. Sounds soothing. It's not. Smoked whale was a medieval sleeping potion made from a mixture of bile, lettuce juice, vinegar, hemlock, henbane, bryony root and poppy syrup. It was supposed to knock you out before surgery. The problem was the dosage varied wildly. Too little and you'd feel every slice. Too much and your soul might quietly exit through your nose. Surgeons had to watch closely. If you stopped twitching, that was great. If you stopped breathing, less great. You feel the pressure against your tooth again. Turns out the pain relief wore off. And now, instead of reaching for more medicine, the healer suggests a more permanent solution. Extraction. No anesthesia. Just a pair of iron tongs, a strong grip, and a prayer to St. Apollonia, the patron saint of dental trauma. The tooth is removed with a crunch. You scream. Or maybe someone else does. Your face is on fire again. The healer offers you a damp cloth soaked in beer and rosemary to bite down on. For the bleeding, they suggest a poultice made of moss and pig lard. It smells like wet fur and old soup. You apply it anyway. Later, back in bed, the room spins gently. Not because of the pain now, but because you drank another sip of the poppy juice. Just enough to take the edge off. Just enough to feel like you're floating above your straw mattress, staring down at your own grimacing body. The irony is that painkillers in the Middle Ages often created more suffering. Liver failure, cognitive damage, blisters, tremors, digestive disasters. But they were addictive in every sense. To the body, to the culture, to the idea that suffering could be softened with something exotic, spicy, or slightly poisonous. Your eyes flutter shut. Your mouth is numb. You're vaguely aware of a spider crawling across your face but can't summon the will to move. It's peaceful, in a woozy, feverish kind of way. And maybe that's the point. Not to cure the pain, just to make you forget it for a little while. But don't get too comfortable, because next comes the medieval cure for anxiety, and it involves sheep's brains, boiled lavender, and a very public exorcism. Your chest feels tight. Your stomach churns. Your thoughts are racing faster than a flea across a wool tunic. Congratulations, you're experiencing medieval anxiety, or as your local healer might describe it, a disturbance of the humours caused by a corruption of air and possibly sin. The remedy? Nothing modern. No breathing exercises, no journaling, no chamomile tea. You're handed a small cloth pouch filled with dried herbs, hung around your neck with a string made of hair from an unusually moody goat. The instructions are simple. Sleep with it. Do not remove it. And try not to inhale too deeply, because some of the herbs might be mildly toxic. Mental health was a mystery in the Middle Ages. If you were sad, anxious, forgetful, or startled easily, the diagnosis varied wildly depending on who you asked. A physician might say your black bile was out of balance. A priest might say you were possessed. A neighbour might suggest you were cursed by someone who didn't like the way you salted your fish. Either way, you were getting treated with a combination of prayers, purges, and potions. And probably none of them were gentle. One of the most popular medieval cures for anxiety was something called syrup of hellebore. A jet black liquid extracted from a poisonous root, hellebore was known to cause dizziness, vomiting, and hallucinations. Perfect. The theory was that the root expelled harmful humours from the body. In reality, it expelled anything in your stomach and probably a few brain cells too. You'd wake up the next morning dazed, confused, and too weak to worry about whatever had stressed you out in the first place. If that didn't work, there were vapour treatments. You would be seated in a small wooden tent and surrounded by burning herbs like mugwort, sage, lavender, and henbane. The vapours would fill your lungs. You were instructed to inhale deeply, meditate, and not ask questions if you started seeing glowing animals or heard the walls whispering. The smoke was often mixed with resin, bark, or dried toads, depending on the purification level required. The experience was part detox, part vision quest, and entirely unsettling. For those plagued by nightmares or insomnia, the go-to treatment was something far more sinister. Dreamcatchers hadn't been invented. What you got instead was a nightcap soaked in mandrake juice and bound tightly around your forehead. The idea was that the herb would enter through your skin and calm the mind. It usually just gave you a headache. If the nightmares persisted, healers often turned to something called feather therapy, where a bird was killed, its blood collected, and the feathers were placed beneath your bed. For protection, for balance, for reasons no one fully understood. The rich had access to more refined substances. Distilled spirit tonics infused with gold flakes and unicorn horn shavings were used to treat melancholy. Of course, unicorns weren't real, so the horn was usually narwhal tusk or deer antler carved into spirals and ground into dust. Gold did nothing for the brain, but it made the mixture expensive enough to seem magical. That, and the fact that the tonic was almost entirely alcohol. Monasteries kept written recipes for these elixirs. Manuscripts described detailed instructions on how to soak rosemary in wine, boil crushed violets with honey, and steep sage in vinegar for 3 days under a waxing moon. The effect was often a mild sedative, followed by bizarre dreams and deeply introspective thoughts about frogs. Some monks believed these potions calmed the soul, others just liked the taste. You sit quietly by the hearth now, sipping a mug of herbal brew made from valerian nettles and what might be beet water. It's bitter, it's earthy, it might make you hallucinate a tree speaking Latin. But it's supposed to quiet the mind. You try to focus. Your hands stop trembling but your eyelids twitch. And then comes the purge. Another common method for treating anxious or melancholic thoughts was to purge the body of whatever was thought to be causing it. This could mean bleeding, forced vomiting, or in more serious cases enemas of wine and herbs injected with a pig bladder syringe. You're not given an option. You're told it is for your own good. You're reminded that the devil enters through the intestines, or the ears, or the spleen, depending on who is lecturing you that day. There is also the dreaded exorcism tincture. This was usually a combination of holy water, crushed garlic, bitter herbs, and salt, mixed into a paste and rubbed onto the chest or temples. The burning sensation was said to draw out spirits. In reality, it just burned. If that failed, a priest would chant over you in Latin while waving incense so thick it made your eyes water and your lungs sting. At some point you were expected to cry. That was good. Tears meant the treatment was working. Too many tears, though, and you were accused of spiritual instability. It was a delicate balance, like trying to season soup with scorpions. Later that evening you lie in bed. You've taken the calming draught. You've sniffed the herb sachet. You've been lightly smacked with a fish spine for spiritual alignment. You are exhausted. But you do not feel calm. You feel strange. Like your organs have shuffled into the wrong places. Like your thoughts are trying to escape through your teeth. There is a bell ringing somewhere. A faint chant echoing in the distance. Or maybe it's just the effect of that wine-drenched valerian root you chewed by mistake. Either way, you're not sure if you're sleeping, or floating, or simply waiting for your brain to finish boiling and drain out your ears like broth. And just when you think medieval stress relief couldn't get more chaotic, the village midwife shows up with a new prescription for your nerves. It's called the Laughing Cure, and it involves fermented honey, rhythmic slapping, and a mysterious blindfold. The concoction is bubbling. It smells faintly of cloves, dirt, and fear. You're not sure what's in it, but the healer told you it would make someone love you, or at least tolerate your face long enough to marry you before winter sets in. So here you are, standing over a steaming clay pot filled with herbs, bark, and something you suspect was alive earlier this morning. There is a fine line between romance and chemical warfare. In the Middle Ages, that line was drawn with chalky powder and stirred with a bone spoon. Love potions were a booming underground industry. Officially, the church banned them. Unofficially, everyone used them. These weren't chocolates and roses. They were infusions of ground beetles, animal brains, human hair, hallucinogenic herbs, and the occasional bodily fluid, all wrapped up in a recipe that no one fully understood and everyone pretended to. A typical medieval aphrodisiac might start with Spanish fly, which is not a fly but a beetle, specifically the blister beetle. When crushed, it produces a chemical called cantharidin, which causes irritation in the urinary tract. This irritation was believed to stimulate desire. What it actually did was mimic the sensation of being set on fire from the inside. If you were lucky, it only caused ulcers. If you were unlucky, kidney failure. Despite this, cantharides were sold openly in apothecaries, often disguised in sweet wine or honeyed cakes. Sometimes it was handed to newlyweds as a bridal tonic. Other times it was secretly added to a rival's meal, under the belief that love could be induced through internal suffering. It often was, just not in the way people hoped. More innocent mixtures included saffron, cloves, cinnamon and pepper. Spices were thought to heat the blood, awaken the senses and inflame the passions, which they did, especially if you were allergic. Some recipes added dried mint, wine-soaked rose petals, or even a little mandrake root. Just a pinch. Enough to make someone feel euphoric, dizzy, and deeply confused about why they were suddenly attracted to someone with half their teeth missing. For those seeking a more aggressive approach, there was wolf liver powder. Ground and dried, it was mixed with vinegar and worn in a pouch beneath the clothing to attract lovers through animal magnetism. No one knew if it worked, but it smelled so bad that if anyone still wanted to kiss you afterward, it was probably true love. Another popular ingredient was basil. Not the kind on your pizza, but the medieval basil, which was believed to draw forth affection from the heart of the unknowing. Mixed with wine and drunk at sunset, it was said to cause dreams of future lovers. Most people just got stomach cramps, occasionally prophetic stomach cramps, occasionally not. It did not stop at drinks. Salves and ointments were applied directly to the skin. One 13th century text recommends an oil made of marjoram, thyme and bear fat rubbed on the thighs before social gatherings. The scent was believed to attract suitors. More likely it attracted wolves, or bears, or angry neighbours wondering why you smelled like a roasting animal. Even churchgoers weren't safe from love remedies. Wafers soaked in rose water and herbal tinctures were passed off as communion by shady herbalists posing as monks. These wafers sometimes included mugwort or vervain, which had mild psychoactive effects. Devotees reported intense visions. Some claimed to fall in love with the first person they saw afterward. Others just vomited into a font and had to be escorted out. You crouch by the fire now watching the potion thicken. It's changed colour 3 times, from brown to green to something that resembles lamp oil and regret. The healer nods. It is ready. You're instructed to let it cool, mix it with a scrap of bread, and serve it to the object of your affection. It should work within an hour, unless they die first, which is rare, but not unheard of. You hesitate. You wonder if love is supposed to smell like boiled cabbage and old socks. You wonder what part of the potion is supposed to be romantic. You take a small sip yourself just to test it. Your tongue tingles, your vision swims. You suddenly feel very emotional about birds. Emotion, after all, was one of the key targets of medieval pharmacology. To feel deeply, to suffer loudly, to pine in agony while reciting poetry on a cold stone bench. Entire industries were built around this idea. Travelling merchants sold sachets of heart balm that contained rose petals, deer antler powder, and dried lily. The instruction was to place it under the tongue before speaking to someone attractive. It usually resulted in stammering, gagging, or both. Some monasteries produced celibacy deterrents for monks struggling with temptation. These were tonics made of hops, vinegar, and crushed willow bark that dulled the senses and caused drowsiness. If that failed, they were fasting herbs. If that failed, public whipping. You do not want public whipping. You just want someone to notice you at the village dance. And so, you deliver the potion. Carefully, secretly, an offering folded inside a warm cup of elderberry wine. The recipient smiles, drinks, and within minutes begins reciting poetry in a language that doesn't exist. It seems the mixture worked. Sort of. There is love. There is passion. There is also excessive sweating, jaw clenching, and a deep desire to walk into the woods and scream at moss. Medieval love was rarely subtle. It was chaotic, drug-fueled, desperate, and wildly unregulated. A single night of passion could involve 3 different brews, a suspicious pastry, and a hallucinated marriage proposal witnessed only by a confused cow. Later, as the moon rises and the potion wears off, you sit alone beside the empty pot. Your hands are sticky, your clothes smell like basil and bear, and your heart feels oddly warm, possibly from joy, possibly from organ failure. But no time for romantic reflection, because next comes the other side of medieval relationships. The potions brewed not to inflame love, but to kill it. From powdered toad bones to cursed vinegar, the dark arts of unlove are about to make their entrance. There is a chill in the air, and it is not coming from the weather. You're holding a bottle of thick, sour liquid that smells like vinegar, ash, and something recently deceased. This is not a love potion. This is the opposite. You're about to drink a medieval breakup elixir. And whether it works by making someone stop loving you, or by making their heart literally stop beating, you're told the outcome is the same. Peace, solitude, closure, or something close enough. In the tangled world of medieval emotions, love was a battlefield, and chemistry was often used as a weapon. When prayer and patience failed, people turned to potions, powders and poultices designed to end affection. These weren't always fatal. Sometimes they were simply designed to make the user smell terrible, lose interest, or forget their lover's name. Other times they were explicitly labelled with warnings like, "Do not use more than 3 drops unless prepared to dig a hole." The first tier of anti-love potions targeted memory. Common ingredients included sage, ivy, lemon balm and wormwood. A tea brewed with wormwood and rosemary was said to unfasten the heart and remove traces of longing. Practically speaking, it caused stomach cramps and a brief episode of dry heaving that did a lot to kill romantic feelings. Monks referred to these teas as herbal distractions. Lovers called them the cup of forgetting. Apothecaries called them inventory. Some mixtures focused on creating emotional aversion. You'd steep valerian root, nettles, and raw garlic in wine, and either drink it yourself or secretly serve it to the person you wanted to repel. The result was a sour stomach, mood swings, and a sudden desire to avoid eye contact. Some claimed it worked instantly. Others reported their target just burped a lot and asked for bread. More extreme potions included ingredients meant to induce dreams of betrayal or disloyalty. These were brewed from fennel seeds, bile, dried leeks, and sometimes crushed beetles. Administered in small doses, they supposedly caused paranoia and jealousy. In large doses, they just caused vomiting and sometimes a mild seizure, but still, effective in its own way. One infamous breakup recipe from a 14th century herbarium listed salted toad powder as the key ingredient. The process was precise. First, find a toad. Second, salt it. Third, burn it until it becomes ash. The resulting dust was stored in a cloth pouch and sprinkled into your lover's shoes, pillow or wine cup. It was believed to slowly erode affection, like emotional rust. It probably just caused itching and fungal infections. But again, goals were achieved. Another tactic was scent sabotage. Patchouli, burnt hair and fermented milk were often mixed into oils and rubbed into clothing or hairbrushes. This made the wearer smell profoundly unappealing. In a time when bathing was already infrequent, weaponizing body odor was a reliable method of forced separation. Some healers swore by adding crushed nettles to underclothes for that extra kick of sting and shame. Public rituals existed too. In some regions, people performed unbinding ceremonies. These involved burning herbs associated with love, such as basil, rosemary and marjoram, while reciting a litany of anti-blessings. The smoke was wafted over the couple's shared bedding or undergarments. If that failed, you could always hire a local wise woman to spit in the ashes and declare the union void. It was legally meaningless, emotionally devastating. You take a sip of the breakup brew, it tastes like sour wine mixed with old leather. Your tongue tingles, your jaw clenches, your body begins to shiver. The healer smiles. That means it is working. Or possibly that they just enjoy watching people regret things. But not all anti-love potions were meant for self-liberation. Some were crafted for punishment. These revenge tonics were usually brewed with bile, charcoal, pepper, and animal dung. The result was often projectile, both emotionally and physically. If someone scorned you in public, the proper response was to slip them a spoonful of fermented radish root oil mixed with goat saliva. The reaction was violent diarrhea and social humiliation. Justice, medieval style. The most sinister recipes were intended to destroy relationships from the outside. Rivals would concoct discord powders and secretly sprinkle them on a couple's threshold or inside their cooking pot. Ingredients varied but often included crushed bones, ashes of burnt letters, and the ashes of specific birds believed to cause domestic unrest. One popular bird was the jackdaw. Burned jackdaw feathers were thought to sow distrust and miscommunication. Mostly they just made soup taste horrible, and if none of this worked, there was always the fallback option. Full poisoning. A slow brew of deadly nightshade and foxglove could be hidden in a wine bottle. Just a few sips and the symptoms would start. Confusion, heart palpitations, a complete lack of interest in romance due to being preoccupied with not dying. This was frowned upon by most churches, but not always prosecuted, especially if you were nobility or particularly subtle. You lie down now, the potion sitting uneasily in your stomach. Your heart is still pounding, but something has shifted. The emotions feel distant, muted. Your brain is fogged with vinegar and valerian. It is unclear whether you've fallen out of love or just deeply into nausea. The room spins gently. The candle flickers. You vaguely recall a sermon about forgiveness, but the toad powder worked faster. The emotional bond has been loosened, torn, melted. Either way, you're single now, and probably mildly toxic. You cough once. Something green comes out. Could be herbs, could be regret. But there is no time to reflect, because the next chapter is already boiling in the back of the apothecary's workshop. A drug used not to kill love or pain, but to predict the future. And it begins with a prophetic mushroom, a shallow grave, and a very suspicious cup of tea. There is a teacup in front of you, if you can call it that. It is technically a broken half-shell of pottery, blackened with age and still warm from the fire. Inside floats something that looks like a rotten leaf and smells faintly of mushrooms and regret. You're told to drink it, slowly, with focus. Because this isn't just a drink, it's a window. In the medieval world, seeing the future was a legitimate profession. The only problem was that most prophets were either completely guessing or dangerously intoxicated. Sometimes both. You lift the cup to your lips, and you are not alone. Throughout the Middle Ages, seers, monks, mystics, and herbalists developed entire rituals designed to induce visions. These weren't just for entertainment. They were used for political decisions, agricultural planning, and occasionally finding lost goats. But the visions rarely came unassisted. They were coaxed out with herbs, fumes, fermented roots, and extremely questionable tea. The most common prophetic brew was made from mugwort. This hardy weed was believed to open the mind, clear spiritual blockages, and promote inner seeing. It was steeped in wine or beer, boiled with honey and mint, and drunk under the moon. The resulting effects included vivid dreams, disorientation, and sometimes wandering into the woods while trying to talk to your ancestors. If you survived the night, your vision was considered accurate. More adventurous vision seekers turned to henbane and mandrake. These were brewed in small quantities by nuns and healers who had access to herb gardens tucked behind monasteries. When consumed in tea or rubbed on the temples with oil, they induced auditory hallucinations, visual distortions, and the sudden ability to see angels in your soup. Records show that some monks used these mixtures before writing prophecies. Others simply lay on the floor and wept. There were also incense rituals. A mixture of frankincense, myrrh, and dried poppy pods was burned in sealed chambers. The thick, sweet smoke filled the lungs, numbed the senses, and induced a trance-like state. Those inside were expected to remain still, observe their visions, and later report them to a scribe. Sometimes the results were profound. Other times, the scribe received a rambling monologue about birds, cheese, and a tree that wouldn't stop screaming. In Germanic regions, dream herbs like valerian and wild lettuce were brewed before sleep and taken with strong wine. The goal was to receive visions from the divine. More often, it resulted in people soiling themselves mid-revelation and waking up in a puddle of both prophecy and poor judgment. You shift your weight. The tea is starting to work. There is a buzzing in your ears. Your skin feels like it is breathing. You're unsure if your eyes are open, or just very aware of the inside of your own skull. A candle flickers in the corner. You're pretty sure it just asked you a question. This is fine. In some cases, the prophetic process involved group rituals. Entire communities would gather to ingest sacred herbs before festivals or planting seasons. The ingredients were usually harvested by moonlight, and included ingredients like belladonna, juniper berries, and moss scraped from church walls. These were boiled into stew or mashed into pastes and shared among participants. By the end of the ceremony, half the town was convinced the wheat crop would be blessed. The other half was chasing invisible rabbits into the river. Certain visionaries became so popular that local lords paid them for predictions. These high-demand seers often had secret recipes, usually guarded in locked chests or passed down through generations. Ingredients included pickled mushrooms, powdered amber, and occasionally bits of mummified animals. The visions they offered included everything from warnings about invasions to instructions on where to dig your next well. Accuracy was rarely the point. The real value was confidence and spectacle. One woman was recorded in a 15th century French text as using owl feathers soaked in linden oil to call forth dreams. She would place the feathers under her clients' pillows and instruct them to fast for a day. The dreams that followed were interpreted using a chart she had copied from an ancient Roman source. It had been translated so many times that the original meaning was lost. One symbol meant both joyful birth and imminent plague. It depended on how recently the pillow had been washed, and when the herbs failed, there were fallback methods: scalding foot baths with crushed garlic, whispering spells into cups of goat milk, pouring candle wax into cold water and watching it harden into shapes. Some of these worked through suggestion, others worked through sheer terror. One popular method involved lying inside a freshly dug grave overnight with a coin under the tongue. You were expected to see visions, or lose your mind. Both were accepted outcomes. Your vision narrows now. The room stretches. The floor becomes a spiral. You feel your body folding inward like parchment. Your mind drifts somewhere between sleep and soup. You hear voices. They sound like bells ringing backward. One tells you the harvest will be good. Another warns you not to trust ducks. The prophecy has begun. Later, when the effects wear off, you will struggle to explain what happened. You will describe shapes, feelings, smells, a distant humming, a cloud that whispered your childhood nickname. It will all make sense, until you try to say it out loud. When someone asks why your breath smells like mushrooms and you're covered in dirt, you will say it was necessary. You saw things, and not just things that are, but things that will be. Like what happens next. Because the next brew isn't for love or prophecy, it's for strength. And it was used to turn frightened men into fearless soldiers, at least for a few minutes. Your hands are shaking, not from fear, at least not anymore. You've just downed a thick brown liquid that tastes like boiled cloves and wet dirt, and your veins are now vibrating with something you were told would fortify the blood. You feel warm, then dizzy, then very sure that you could punch a tree and win. The healer called it a courage tonic. You were not told what was in it, but you saw her stir it with a knife and mutter something about bear teeth. In medieval warfare, the line between medicine and madness was extremely flexible. Soldiers needed bravery. They needed endurance. They also needed to keep moving with gaping wounds and frozen feet. And if a potion could do that, then they drank it, or rubbed it into their gums, or snorted it off a rock. Whatever got the job done. Most of these concoctions were stimulant-based, not refined chemicals, roots, bark, seeds, brewed into sludgy tea or ground into paste and smeared under the tongue. The goal was not elegance. The goal was survival. You needed to feel like a war god, even if you were covered in lice and had trench foot in both legs. One of the most notorious battlefield boosters was a blend of juniper berries, black pepper, vinegar, and crushed mustard seed. Known in some circles as fire wine, it was carried into battle in wineskins and passed around just before the charge. The burning sensation in the throat made men feel powerful. The pepper caused shortness of breath, rapid heartbeat, and temporary vision loss. Exactly what you want before running into a wall of swords. Some soldiers preferred chews. These were balls of mashed herbs and fat, often kept in pockets and sucked like candy. One recipe from a 13th century French manuscript included sage, garlic, fennel, and powdered deer antler, all mashed into pig lard and rolled in ash. It was believed to increase aggression and stamina. It mostly just gave you stomach cramps and made you smell like a burning stable. But again, intimidation was half the battle. In Norse regions, berserker warriors had their own traditions. Though popular myth exaggerates their methods, there is evidence they used hallucinogenic mushrooms, such as Amanita muscaria, before going into battle. These mushrooms caused confusion, distorted vision, and bursts of uncontrollable rage. Archaeological findings include mushroom residue on Viking combs and drinking horns. Historical accounts mention warriors frothing at the mouth and screaming through arrows like they were bee stings, which sounds impressive, until the mushroom wore off and you realised you had charged a tree stump for 10 minutes. Back in continental Europe, monastery commissioned soldiers sometimes received blessed tonics before a siege. These included warm beer steeped with angelica root and dried rose petals, intended to provide spiritual protection and digestive clarity. It was less effective than the mushroom method, but significantly more pleasant, and you were less likely to bite your own shield. You feel the tonic kicking in now. Your ears are ringing. Your teeth feel loose. You can't stop blinking, but you are ready for war. Or at least ready to shout loudly in a straight line, which is close enough. Pain management was another issue entirely. Battlefield medics were rarely trained, and they travelled with bags full of flammable liquids, mystery powders, and iron tools that doubled as kitchen equipment. One favourite item was soldier's balm, a thick paste made of goose fat, soot, and powdered charcoal, rubbed directly onto wounds with the belief it would draw out evil spirits. In practice, it attracted flies and sealed the injury under a layer of sticky grime. Still, it felt warm. That counted for something. There was also biting cloth, soaked in vinegar and infused with thyme or poppy. This was given to men having limbs removed or arrows yanked out. You bit down hard, took a sip of burning wine, and hoped you passed out before the third tug. If you didn't, there was always smoke. Henbane leaves were burned and blown toward the wounded until they coughed themselves into unconsciousness. Some commanders distributed march salts to keep their men moving. These were small packets of salt, dried mint and crushed nettles tied in cloth and tucked under the tongue. It gave the illusion of hydration and made the mouth tingle. Others favoured vinegar water steeped in cloves, which was sipped between skirmishes to keep the senses sharp, or at least distracted. And then there was the death powder, not for dying, for avoiding it. A medieval blend of powdered garlic, pepper, dried sage, and chicken bone ash. You rubbed it on your chest before battle, not because it helped, but because it smelled so foul that horses refused to trample you. One knight in a 14th century account reportedly coated his entire body in the stuff, declared himself immune to arrows, and charged into enemy lines naked except for boots and a hat. He was immediately shot, but not trampled. After the battle, the real treatment began. Soldiers were given mixtures of willow bark, beer, and honey to ease pain and inflammation. Sometimes this worked. More often, it put them into a sticky coma from which they woke up confused and partially cauterized. Monks used poultices of crushed ivy and lard to treat broken bones. If that failed, the limb was simply removed. The patient was offered poppy tea and told to bite down on their lucky sock. You lie back on your makeshift bed now. The tonic has worn off. You feel every ache in your joints, every bruise, every tooth you might have chipped on your helmet. Your lips are cracked, your fingers twitch, There's still powder on your chest that smells like burned chicken, but you lived. You made it through the day, thanks to fire wine, garlic balls, and something you inhaled that may have been part of a mushroom or possibly a rat. And just when your eyes start to close, you're handed a new remedy for sleep. It is warm. It is bitter. It is already dripping down your chin, and it is made from boiled lettuce, rotting herbs, and a few drops of something you're not allowed to ask about. You're exhausted. Your bones ache. Your ears are ringing. The warmth of the battlefield fire is long gone, and your hands still smell faintly of vinegar and panic. You lie down on a blanket that feels like old hair and gravel, and for a moment you think you might finally drift off. But then the coughing starts. Someone 2 feet away begins snoring through what sounds like a nose full of bees. Something rustles near your foot. You hope it is not the chicken again. You reach into your pouch for the only remedy you trust at this hour. A small linen sachet filled with dried herbs and something sticky. You drop it into a cup of weak ale and stir slowly. It is warm, bitter, and smells like sadness soaked in time. You close your eyes and drink. In the Middle Ages, sleep was not a given. It was a luxury, a fragile, fleeting accident of timing, weather, and digestive luck. Between lice, freezing draughts, chronic pain, and the constant threat of being robbed or eaten by a pig, people went to extraordinary lengths to find rest. And like everything else in this era, the solution was often to drink something that might also be used to clean a latrine or preserve a corpse. The most common medieval sedative was lettuce, specifically wild lettuce. Known as lactuca virosa, it was boiled into tea and served before bed as a calming draught. It contained a mild sedative compound that helped people relax. That is, if you didn't mind the aftertaste of swamp water and the tendency for the tea to ferment in the cup if left too long. Some healers added honey, others added wormwood, which defeated the purpose by making your dreams aggressive and full of shadows. Another popular option was poppy syrup, made by boiling the seed heads of the poppy plant in water and reducing the liquid into a thick molasses-like goo. It was taken by the spoonful and guaranteed to knock you unconscious within minutes. Parents gave it to children, monks gave it to the sick, surgeons gave it to themselves. Overdoses were common, but if you were lucky, you simply woke up 3 days later with no memory and a pillow full of drool. Valerian root was also widely used. It smelled like rotting feet and boiled fish, but when dried and steeped, it produced a calming effect on the nervous system. Soothing dreams were promised. Night sweats and hallucinations were the more common result. One monastery in northern England produced so much valerian tea that their dormitory was nicknamed the House of Sleeping Prophets, not because the monks had visions, but because they routinely woke up in the middle of the night convinced they had been visited by glowing foxes. You shift beneath your blanket now. Your tongue is numb, your toes are twitching. The fires died down, but you're still sweating. The tea is working, or malfunctioning. You're not sure which. Sleep elixirs often contained more than herbs. Animal parts were common. Ground deer antler, dissolved snail slime, even powdered owl bone were added to tonics believed to improve dream clarity. The logic was simple. Animals that moved silently or slept during the day must have special knowledge about rest. Whether that knowledge translated through your digestive tract was unclear. But if the potion made you drowsy and didn't kill you, it was considered a success. More elite sleepers had access to stronger potions. These included mulled wine infused with saffron, lavender, chamomile, and small amounts of belladonna. The warmth of the wine relaxed the muscles. The herbs softened the nerves. The belladonna made you forget what year it was and temporarily stopped your eyelids from blinking. Side effects included blurred vision, dry mouth, and sudden spiritual crises. These were considered acceptable trade-offs. For deeper sleep, healers sometimes created ointments. One popular recipe involved mixing henbane, mandrake, and pig fat into a paste, and rubbing it on the soles of the feet or inside the nostrils. This bypassed the stomach and delivered the herbs straight into the bloodstream through the skin. The effect was profound. You would drift off slowly, slip into unconsciousness, and wake up 10 hours later, unable to remember your own name. For many, that was ideal. You begin to feel weightless. Your limbs no longer belong to you. Your ears are filled with humming, not from bees this time, from something deeper. Your brain begins releasing images that make no sense but feel oddly important. A chicken wearing a crown, a field of whispering spoons, the face of your cousin floating above a bucket. It is working. Some sleep tonics included rituals. You were meant to chant or hum or place a stone under your tongue while drinking. Some had prayers stitched into the linen of the sachet. Others had instructions like, never consume during rain, or only stir with the left hand. These weren't superstitions, they were survival tips. One wrong move and your dreams could turn into a medieval theme park of despair. One healer in Prague swore by a sleep aid made from mashed onions, apple cider, and boiled sage, left to ferment under a full moon. He insisted it produced dreams so peaceful that patients sometimes forgot to wake up. Others disagreed, especially the one man who drank a double dose and woke up naked in a chimney. There were also sleep stones, small carved rocks soaked in valerian and wrapped in cloth, placed beside the bed or under the pillow. These were believed to radiate calming energy. In reality, they radiated mildew and attracted rats. But the placebo was powerful. Sometimes all it took to sleep was believing you had permission. You drift now, deeper. The room is gone. Your thoughts untangle. Your muscles melt into straw. For a brief moment you feel nothing. No weight, no worry. No need to clutch your knife in your sleep. You're a floating sack of herbs in a warm broth of oblivion, and that is exactly where you want to be. But not for long, because dawn is coming, and with it, the morning rituals, which begin with a sharp stick, a burning lump of resin, and a drug you sniff through your nose to make the demons go away. You wake up gasping, not because of a nightmare, not this time. This is something worse. Your throat is dry. Your mouth tastes like burned onions and regret. There is a sharp tingling in your nose and a sensation that your brain is trying to escape through the front of your skull. You sit up. The blanket clings to your back like wet parchment, and before you can even rub the crust from your eyes, a healer thrusts a small, grimy tin under your nose. You sneeze, violently, 4 times in a row. Congratulations, you've just experienced your first dose of morning powder. In the Middle Ages, sleep may have been hard to find, but waking up was often harder, and not because people wanted to stay in bed. No one wanted to linger on a flea-infested straw mat longer than necessary. But after a night of narcotic wine and fermented valerian, your body was not exactly eager to stand up and face the chickens. That is where the drugs came in. Morning began with stimulants, primitive, pungent, and entirely unregulated. These were not sips of coffee or a splash of cold water. These were intranasal assaults with herbs and minerals designed to shock your system into action. The powders were called epistema, snuff, or sometimes just the stirrer. Recipes varied, but common ingredients included powdered rosemary, dried mint, vinegar crystals, and traces of ammonia scraped from chamber pots and sun-dried on windowsills. A pinch of that under your nostrils and you would be wide awake, questioning your life and unable to blink for an hour. More ambitious versions included black pepper, powdered ginger, or finely ground mustard seed. These were sold by travelling apothecaries and were especially popular with soldiers, monks, and merchants who needed to be alert before sunrise. A single whiff could clear your sinuses, burn your eyebrows slightly, and make you cry for reasons you couldn't explain. It was spiritual, it was painful, it was strangely addictive. But nasal revival was only part of the ritual. Most mornings began with cleansing, a term that covered everything from mild laxatives to full gastrointestinal purges that left you temporarily weightless. This was not about hygiene, this was about balancing your humours. According to Galenic medicine, sleep allowed toxins to accumulate in the body. These toxins had to be purged before you could properly digest your breakfast of sour beer and whatever was still edible in your neighbour's pantry. The most basic purgative was warm vinegar mixed with honey and thyme. Taken in the morning, it was meant to awaken the gut. It did. Along with everything else, stronger concoctions included rhubarb root, aloe resin, or the ever-popular senna, which induced rapid and violent evacuation. Medieval journals record men running from barns with their trousers around their ankles, howling like saints on fire. The process was loud, undignified, and often repeated weekly. For the wealthy, there were personalised morning elixirs. Nobles might begin their day with a goblet of cordial wine, infused with saffron, cinnamon, dried rose petals, and crushed pearls. Some versions added powdered coral or ground deer liver for vitality. The taste was somewhere between spiced syrup and gravel. The intended effect was to stimulate appetite, improve complexion, and align the spirit. The actual effect was usually bloating and a suspicious rash. You're handed a mug now. It's warm, murky. There is a small leaf floating on top and something grainy clinging to the bottom. You sip cautiously. It tastes like thyme, but angrier. Your stomach growls, then lurches. Your mouth waters in a way that feels like a warning. You stand up anyway. You're told it is important to move, to let the herbs disperse. You do. You regret it instantly. There were also spiritual morning rituals. Monks often inhaled incense made from dried juniper and frankincense, believed to purify the lungs and clear the mind. Sometimes this worked. Other times it caused coughing fits so severe that new psalms had to be written to apologise for the noises. Some monasteries practised early morning bloodletting. Not much, just a ceremonial prick to release the stale blood of sleep. The participant was expected to remain still, think holy thoughts, and not faint. In rural communities, morning blessings were combined with herbal compresses. A cloth soaked in vinegar, sage, and occasionally cow's milk was slapped onto the chest or back to stimulate circulation. If the person did not wake up, the cloth was heated again and slapped harder. If they still did not respond, someone checked to make sure they had not been replaced during the night by a fairy. Even the breath needed purification. Gargling was common, but not with mint. Mixtures included burnt alum, boiled onions, or a concoction of vinegar and powdered bone. It whitened the teeth, or removed them entirely, depending on how vigorously you swished. And for those whose mornings required extra protection, there was the talismanic dose. This was a single drop of a sacred liquid placed under the tongue, often holy water mixed with crushed myrrh or powdered relic. It was believed to guard against spiritual attacks, bad dreams, and stray arrows. It also made your tongue go numb and left your breath smelling like incense and mould. You cough now. The tea has finished working, your stomach is empty, your mouth is tingling, you're upright, you're technically alive, and you're ready to face the day, but your body is trembling, your fingers are twitching, and your brain is foggy from all the sneezing, sipping, and spiritual leaking. So what happens next? A breakfast drug. Yes, that was a thing. A spiced lump of compressed herbs pressed into a cake soaked in wine and taken alongside your first meal. For digestion, for energy, and possibly for whatever illness you caught from sleeping next to someone who forgot to bathe for 6 months. You're not hungry, not after what just came out of you. Your stomach is a hollow drum, still echoing from the vinegar purge and the snuff that made you sneeze so hard your soul tried to evacuate. But now it is morning. There is work to do, and work requires strength, which means it is time for breakfast, and your breakfast is a pill, not a modern capsule, not a gel-coated, lab-tested supplement. This is a hardened ball of mashed herbs, wine-soaked breadcrumbs, pig fat, and dried flowers, shaped by hand and left to dry in the sun on a wooden tray that may have once been used to shoe a horse. You chew slowly. It tastes like compost. But it is not meant to be enjoyed. It is meant to stimulate the stomach, and possibly the imagination. Medieval breakfast was rarely just food. It was medicine, and in most cases heavily fermented. People understood that the body was sluggish in the morning, weighed down by sleep and humours that pooled in unpleasant places. So the first meal of the day was often designed to restart the body, with drugs, with wine, with herbs, and with an urgency that made every bite feel like a small exorcism. The most common breakfast drink was not water. It was weak beer, ale, or wine infused with warming herbs like fennel, sage, cinnamon, or bay leaf. Some versions included egg yolks or grated bread. Others included black pepper and nutmeg, which caused mild tingling and accelerated digestion. You were expected to sip slowly while standing in sunlight. That way, the heat would activate the mixture. What it usually activated was heartburn. For those with more refined palates or access to monastery kitchens, there were digestive jams. These were not for spreading, these were for swallowing. A sticky black goop made of dates, honey, vinegar, and spiced root. It was rolled into balls and taken before the first bite of food. The result was predictable: sweating, burping, and a stomach so awake it growled in Latin. Many were called electuaries and were kept in small ceramic pots. The recipes were guarded, so were the consequences. Bread itself could be medicated. Healers often recommended morning loaves made with cumin, caraway, or flaxseed, not just for flavour, but to regulate bowel activity. Some versions included wormwood, which supposedly improved appetite but often ruined the rest of the day. One recipe included powdered antler and lard. Another included dried nettle and rye soaked in vinegar. The flavour was bitter. The texture was damp. The results were immediate. You sit now, chewing slowly, trying to convince yourself that this is food. The bread is hard. The jam is medicinal. The tea smells like boiled mint and regret. A monk hands you a spoonful of a yellow paste made from egg yolk, wine, and marjoram. He tells you it will prevent wind. You're skeptical. You're also gassy. There were also spice cakes. Dense, sweet-smelling bricks of ground dates, cloves, and herbs shaped into small rounds and baked over hot stones. These were used to encourage warmth and optimism. They were also, unknowingly, loaded with fibre and natural laxatives. So you might begin your day smiling, but you would end it in a shrubbery. The working class favoured more functional breakfast drugs. One popular mixture was a mash of leeks, garlic, and stale ale, eaten cold. It was said to ward off illness, banish bad dreams, and clear the throat. It mostly made your breath into a weapon. Another classic was bone broth spiked with fennel and mint. You drank it quickly and ignored the occasional floating hair. Some apothecaries sold wake root biscuits. These were hard, crunchy wafers containing dried ginseng, mustard seed, and occasionally powdered charcoal. They were chewed alongside warm mead or soaked in water and swallowed whole. One 15th century recipe recommends washing it down with a spoonful of goat's milk mixed with fire wine and a whisper of salt. That whisper could easily become a shout depending on who mixed it. You're handed a final item, a small nugget wrapped in cloth and tied with twine. You unwrap it. It looks like a prune covered in soot. You're told to swallow it whole. You ask why. The healer shrugs. For vitality. You do as you're told. It gets stuck halfway down. You cough until your eyes water. You feel warm and slightly dizzy. Monasteries kept entire ledgers of morning medicinal meals. Some included almond milk, boiled oats, and flour syrup. Others suggested pheasant hearts or pickled plum skins soaked in wine. If that failed to wake the body, there were fallback options, like chewing raw horseradish while standing in cold water, or pouring a mix of honey and hot vinegar behind the ears. And for those truly in need of motivation, there was the salt dose, a shot glass of water mixed with salt, lemon, and dried ginger root. You drank it quickly. You regretted it instantly. But your stomach responded like it had just been slapped with divine judgment. Breakfast was not about comfort. It was about function, fuel, cleansing, resetting the digestive machine that had spent the night slowly fermenting whatever you ate for dinner. And in many cases, it was about survival. A bad breakfast could ruin a week. A good one could give you enough energy to lift a plough, carry a pig, or run away from your neighbour's angry goose. You finish your meal, or medicine, or whatever that was. Your belly is warm. Your throat is coated in something sticky. Your tongue feels slightly floral. You stand up. You're sweating already. You're also strangely alert. as if your intestines had been given marching orders, and now it's time to go. Not to work, to the outhouse, because breakfast was only the beginning. And what comes next is called the midday reset, a mysterious hour when monks rubbed herbs into their eyelids and peasants drank root wine to stay awake. The sun is high now. The light pours down like judgment. You've already purged, eaten, nearly cried twice, and are beginning to wonder if your feet are still attached or simply operating independently out of spite. The chickens are louder than usual. Your shirt is damp. Your eyes sting. You feel like you've been gently cooked. But the workday is far from over, and so it is time for the midday reset. Your healer hands you a cloth, not to wipe your face, to inhale. It smells like mint, vinegar, old garlic, and something burned beyond recognition. You press it to your nose and breathe deeply. You immediately regret this decision. In the medieval world, afternoon fatigue was considered a moral failing. Lethargy meant laziness. Laziness meant sin, especially for monks, soldiers or peasants expected to haul rocks until their arms detached. To prevent this moral collapse, medieval people turned to a bizarre toolkit of drugs, stimulants, and physical interventions that were less about productivity and more about shocking the soul back into its meat sack. The most common solution was herb-scented cloths. These were scraps of fabric soaked in spiced wine, dried rosemary, vinegar, and ground mustard seed. Carried in pouches or tied to belts, they were inhaled whenever someone began to nod off or show signs of mental wandering. Some included cinnamon, bay leaf, or saffron for added luxury. Most just smelled like regret. More ambitious workers used midday cordials. These were liquids made by soaking stimulating herbs in wine or ale, and taking a spoonful around noon. Ingredients varied but often included angelica root, hyssop, and black pepper. Some included crushed coral or ant eggs. The effect was usually a warm stomach, watery eyes, and the vague sensation that your skin had been replaced with burlap. You're now handed a paste. It is thick, pale green, and comes in a tiny bowl. You're told to rub it into your temples. You obey. It smells like camphor and old cheese. You feel a slow burn spread across your forehead, then a sudden burst of clarity. You can hear everything. The wind, the birds, the internal squeak of your own eyeballs. Monasteries developed dozens of midday recipes to combat fatigue. One involved chewing cloves soaked in vinegar, another called for sipping warm beer steeped with dried lavender and crushed beetles. Some monks drank water left out overnight with iron nails soaking in it, believing it restored strength. The flavour was described in records as metallic and slightly violent. But the strangest cure for midday slump came in the form of eyeball tonics. Drops made from rosewater, fennel juice and dried rue were carefully dripped into the eyes. The sting was immediate. The alertness was undeniable. Some monks swore by it. Others went blind. Either way, no one was sleeping afterward. Peasant workers had their own traditions. Some chewed raw horseradish during the hottest hours of the day. Others rubbed a mixture of vinegar and thyme into their armpits, which was believed to stimulate the heart. Blacksmiths often kept pots of burning rosemary beside their forges. The scent was supposed to sharpen focus. It mostly just covered the smell of fear and singed hair. You crouch now in the shade, panting slightly, your mouth dry, your brain twitching from whatever you just rubbed on your face. You're offered a drink. It is called sun brew. Made by leaving herbs in a clay pot in direct sunlight, it contains nettle, sage, lemon balm and mint. The warmth makes it soothing. The bitterness makes it unforgivable. You swallow anyway. Nobles had access to better blends. A midday refreshment known as claritas was popular among wealthy court officials. Made of rose petals, cinnamon, ginger and unicorn root, it was served chilled in glass goblets and accompanied by thin wafers of aniseed bread. It cost a fortune. It also gave most people diarrhea. Nobles called it purification. Servants called it predictable. Travellers carried lozenges called weight cakes. These were small, coin-sized discs made from honey, caraway and fennel, baked until hard and then sucked throughout the day. The goal was to stave off sleep, sharpen the tongue, and prevent midday melancholy. They worked, until your tongue blistered. Military camps preferred simpler methods. Heated stones soaked in vinegar and wrapped in cloth were pressed against the back of the neck to shock the body awake. Some soldiers inhaled powdered mustard or pepper through the nose. Others bit into raw onions, letting the fumes clear the sinuses and discourage social interaction. Your tongue now feels swollen. Your fingers are jittery. Your shirt clings like second skin. You're sweating again, but your thoughts are clearer. You're aware of every twig, every breeze, every droplet crawling down your spine. You are alive, and also slightly vibrating. But the clock keeps turning. The day is not done, and soon it will be evening, which means it will be time to rest again. But not yet. Not until you cleanse the day's evil from your mouth, rub wine on your teeth, and gargle with a medieval tincture designed to banish sin, bad breath, and possibly your taste buds. Your breath smells like boiled onions and regret. Not surprising. You've chewed 3 different roots today, drank something that may have contained wine, flowers, and floor sweepings, snorted 2 kinds of powder, and rubbed a mystery paste on your eyelids. You have been sweating for hours, and now it is almost time to eat. But not yet. First, you have to cleanse. Not your hands, not your soul, your mouth, and the healer is already handing you a ladle full of something that smells like mint, vinegar, and a dying plant. You swirl it, you sniff it, you gag a little, then you drink. Medieval people understood that the mouth was both a gateway and a battleground. A gateway to disease, to sin, to demons, to social judgment. If your breath offended, you could be accused of moral weakness. If your gums bled, it might be a sign of spiritual decay. If you lost a tooth, it was either your diet or the devil. Sometimes both. And while most people didn't brush their teeth in the modern sense, they absolutely medicated their mouths. Mouthwashes came first. Vinegar was the base, always cheap, sharp, unforgiving. Mixed with herbs like sage, thyme, mint, or rosemary, it was used to rinse the mouth after meals, after naps, or after particularly sinful dreams. Some formulas included wine, honey, or even salt water from the sea. The goal was not flavour. The goal was purging. You were supposed to swish until your cheeks ached, and then spit forcefully into the dirt. Bonus points if it steamed. You lean over now, drooling slightly, trying to remember if you just swallowed part of a rosemary twig. Your tongue burns. Your gums throb. Your teeth feel like they've been boiled. Perfect. That means it's working. For the devout, there were blessed rinses. Holy water was infused with myrrh, cinnamon, or powdered relic dust. Not because these things cleaned the mouth, but because they cleaned the air that exited it. This was considered vital for monks, priests, and anyone who might speak near someone important, especially if they planned to confess. No one wanted to hear sins through halitosis. Tooth powders were next. These were dry mixtures of crushed herbs, ground eggshells, burned bread, salt, and occasionally oyster shell. You dipped a wet cloth or finger into the powder and rubbed it across your teeth until your gums screamed. The sensation was rough, the smell was worse, but the result was technically cleaner, unless you had cavities. Then the pain simply became spiritual. One popular blend included dried mint, powdered charcoal, and ground bones. It was believed to whiten teeth and strengthen the jaw. Records suggest it also caused gum recession and occasional nosebleeds. But again, cleanliness was pain, and so people used it willingly, sometimes twice a week, sometimes after every meal, especially if they had to speak to someone they hated. You're handed a second cloth now. This one is damp and smells like cloves and goat. You're told to chew it. It is a breath wrapper, a soaked square of linen infused with essential oils, and pinned under the tongue with a splinter of pine. The sharpness is immediate. You cough. Your eyes water. Your jaw vibrates slightly. This is also normal. Monks had access to specialised recipes. Some involved chewing licorice roots soaked in wine. Others required rinsing with boiled fennel water. One monastery kept a barrel of breath tonic made from rosewater, vinegar, nutmeg, and crushed pearls. It was kept in the apothecary and administered in tiny sips. Too much caused fainting. Too little did nothing. The right amount made your burp smell faintly divine. Peasants relied on simpler methods, chewing parsley, mint, or sage directly from the garden, sucking on cinnamon bark or burned twigs. Some simply kept a pebble in their mouth to prevent bad smells from escaping during conversations. It was not comfortable, but it was effective. If you couldn't talk, you couldn't offend. In court, breath was political. Diplomats carried scent coins infused with dried herbs to press under the tongue before negotiations. One royal advisor reportedly rinsed his mouth every 2 hours with lemon juice mixed with alum, which left his teeth white but caused chronic bleeding. He smiled constantly, possibly from pain. You spit again. Your mouth is numb. Your tongue feels like wood. Your lips tingle. You feel strangely lightheaded and deeply aware of your molars. This is good. You're ready. Dinner can now begin, and dinner is dangerous, because what you eat could cure you, or ruin you, depending on what herbs were hiding in the stew. You sit down slowly, not out of politeness, out of fatigue. Your knees are swollen, your feet smell like wet wool, your back feels like someone filled it with gravel and then kicked it for entertainment, but there is food, and that is enough. A pot is steaming in the middle of the room. The scent is confusing. You smell meat, but also cloves. Something sweet, something sharp, something floral, which may or may not be soap. You reach for a spoon, but before you take your first bite, the healer mutters a blessing over your bowl. Not a prayer for safety, a warning. This stew contains medicine. In the medieval world, meals were rarely just food. They were therapy. They were chemistry. They were a controlled experiment with inconsistent variables and no clear dosage. Every dish had a purpose, some to nourish, some to regulate humours, some to prevent evil, and some to purge whatever was clinging to your internal organs from last week's fermented breakfast biscuit. The most common delivery method for medication was broth. It was simple, everything dissolved in it. Herbs, spices, bark, oil, even crushed minerals. A pot of soup could become a pharmacy. Ginger for digestion, sage for mental clarity, thyme for gas, mint for spiritual calm, fennel for mysterious purposes no one remembered but swore by anyway. You take your first bite. It is warm, salty, then bitter, then oddly metallic. You chew something you hope was a root. You swallow it anyway. You were told this stew would fortify the liver. You do not know what your liver needs fortifying against, but you trust the woman who smells like burnt rosemary and says your soul has a slight tilt to the left. Many dishes in the Middle Ages were purpose-built to do something to you, not just feed you, alter you, tame your urges, balance your bile. Food was categorized by temperature, dryness, and humoral quality. Rabbit was cold and moist. Pork was hot and dry. Lentils were dangerous unless boiled with garlic. Cabbage was fine unless you were melancholic, in which case it might kill you. Spices were medicine. Cinnamon to warm the blood. Saffron to elevate mood. Cloves for tooth pain. Black pepper to rekindle the internal fires. Nutmeg for nervous disorders. The more spices in your meal, the more medicinal it was considered. The downside was cost. A heavily spiced dinner meant someone was either wealthy, sick, or both. Bread was a drug delivery system all on its own. Medicinal loaves included ingredients like anise, poppy seed, or dried chamomile. Some were soaked in wine, dried, and then rehydrated with herb-infused vinegar. Others were layered with powders made from crushed beetles or moss scraped from healing stones. These were served to the ill, the elderly, or those who looked particularly unlucky. You reach for a cup now. The wine inside is red, warm, and smells faintly of rosemary and something sour. You sip. It's been spiced, not just for taste, but for function. This is Hippocras, a medieval concoction of wine, sugar, cinnamon, and healing herbs. It is meant to aid digestion, and make you cheerful. It does neither, but it is strong, and that counts for something. Monks specialised in medicated food. Their kitchens were laboratories. Recipes included boiled almond milk mixed with betony and sage, oat gruel stirred with crushed myrtle leaves, and cheese wrapped in horseradish-soaked cloth. These were prescribed by infirmarians, the monk physicians who treated ailments of the flesh, mind and soul, with meals that were either delicious or deeply alarming. Peasant stews were simpler but still spiked with function. Common additives included garlic, leeks, wild onion, and the occasional dandelion root. If someone had a fever, you added mint. If someone had a cough, you added mustard seed. If someone had both, you burned the pot and started over. Sometimes nettles were thrown in for fibre and punishment. You chew slowly now. Your lips tingle. Your jaw aches. The stew is doing something. You feel warm, then cold, then warm again. You're told this is normal, that the thyme is activating and the sage is circulating. You nod, mostly because it's easier than asking what is activating where. Dessert is a small cake, dense, spongy, covered in a thin syrup that smells like vinegar and honey. Inside is a paste made from mashed dates, ground pepper, and a pinch of powdered iron. It is meant to strengthen the blood. You eat it anyway. It tastes like sweet gravel. You have never been stronger. Dinnertime drugging wasn't limited to intentional remedies. Sometimes meals were accidentally medicated. Moldy bread containing early forms of penicillin, over-fermented beer with mild narcotic effects, fish that sat too long and became psychedelic by accident. One monk reportedly had visions of Saint Peter after eating pickled eels that had been left in the sun. He was celebrated. The eel was buried. In some noble households, physicians were required to inspect the evening meal, not for poison, for imbalance, too much dryness, not enough coolness. Bread served too hot could inflame the stomach. Stew without cumin could cause weeping. The corrections were added directly to the dish, often mid-meal. Guests were expected to eat anyway. You finish your bowl, your stomach is heavy, your mind is light, you feel full, but also thoughtful. Your ears feel warm, your vision sharpens slightly, then dulls. You look at your spoon and feel a strange connection to it. The healer nods. The stew has entered you. You're safe now, possibly sedated. And as the sun dips low and your blood is fortified, you're handed one final item. A sticky pellet of crushed myrrh, honey and dried sage. Not to eat, to burn. Because as night falls, it's time for protection. The kind that comes from smoke, incense and drugs meant to keep demons out of your dreams. The lump is already smoking. It sizzles faintly as the healer places it on a dish of hot coals. A thin stream of grey vapour curls upward and begins to fill the room. It smells like honey, ashes, dried thyme, and something that might be old leather. You're instructed to breathe slowly, to close your eyes, to think pure thoughts. You can't think anything at all. Your nostrils are stinging and your brain feels like it is being politely rearranged. This is not a ritual. It is medicine. It is protection. It is bedtime fumigation. In the medieval world, nighttime was dangerous. You could be visited by demons, spirits, disease, or memories of something you said to a noble 3 years ago that still haunts you. The solution was not sleep hygiene. It was smoke, and lots of it. Fumigation was one of the oldest forms of drug-based medicine in Europe. You didn't ingest it. You didn't rub it in. You burned it. You filled your space with it, and you let it do the rest. Monks did it daily. Peasants did it seasonally. Nobles did it with imported ingredients and very smug facial expressions. The smoke you're inhaling right now is probably a blend of dried sage, wormwood, and crushed frankincense resin, all rolled in honey and sun-baked into a puck. It was believed to ward off evil, clear the air, and settle the body before sleep. Whether it worked or not is irrelevant. You already feel dizzy, and your toes are tingling. Medical texts of the time were filled with fumigation recipes. One manuscript from the 13th century lists over 40 types. Some were calming, some were stimulating, some were meant to force sneezing. Others were said to cause dreams so vivid they could reveal the future. Many included herbs like mugwort, rue, bay leaf, and yarrow. If you were lucky, it just made the room smell interesting. If you weren't, it caused nosebleeds. You lie down now on your straw-stuffed mat. The smoke coils in the rafters. It creeps into your blanket. It soaks into your hair. This is intentional. The belief was that the body absorbed the essence of the smoke during sleep, that your pores opened like little mouths and swallowed the medicine whole, especially if you were sweating, which you are. Not all fumigants were made for humans. Bedding was regularly smoked with rosemary or juniper to drive out lice, fleas, or whatever else had decided to make a kingdom in your pillow. Clothes were hung near braziers filled with burning lavender stems and onion skins. This served two purposes: deodorant and plague prevention, both marginally successful. Churches used elaborate censers to spread sacred smokes. These often contained frankincense, myrrh, and storax, a resin so sticky it had to be scraped off trees with special knives. The purpose was to purify the air before prayer. It also disguised the smell of unwashed pilgrims. Monks were trained in the art of swinging censers without setting themselves or the congregation on fire, a skill that was sometimes passed down through generations. You blink slowly. The smoke is thicker now, your breathing slows, your chest feels heavy but comforted. You hear something crackle in the brazier and wonder briefly if that was part of the ritual or just an accident. Some fumigations were strategic. In certain villages, doors were sealed and rooms filled with dense clouds of smoke during plague outbreaks. It was believed to drive out the corrupted air or suffocate it, depending on how tightly you sealed the room. One method involved burning a combination of vinegar-soaked rags, sulfur, and powdered garlic. The effect was dramatic, sometimes lethal, always memorable. Others were purely psychological. Healers burned dried orange peel mixed with cinnamon to induce calm. Some created sachets of powdered rose petals and clove, set them on glowing embers, and had patients breathe through their sleeves. This was known as soul warming. The medical benefits were unclear, but it made people feel like something was being done, which in medieval medicine was at least half the point. You roll over now. The smell has shifted. Sweeter. Deeper. Someone has added poppy resin to the coals. This is meant to aid sleep. It also causes vivid dreams, possibly prophetic, possibly not, possibly involving horses with human voices. You're warned not to panic, to let the visions come, to write nothing down. Animal dung was also used. Dried goat droppings were burned with herbs to create what was known as earth smoke. It was said to balance temperament and ward off nightmares. No one questioned why nightmares needed to be smoked out. It was accepted, like onions in your socks, or burying a potato to cure a fever. Fumigation also served social functions. Before guests arrived, hosts would burn special woods or resins to prepare the space. A combination of cedar bark, laurel leaves, and pine needles was considered festive. Burning clove or cardamom indicated wealth. Burning mustard seed meant someone had recently vomited in that room, and they were trying to cover it up. You pull the blanket over your head. The smoke is in your throat now. Your limbs feel floaty. Your mind begins to drift. You remember the stew. You remember the face of the healer. You forget your own name briefly, and that too is expected. You're safe. The room is sacred. The air is drugged. Your dreams will arrive shortly, and if they don't, there is a backup ritual involving roasted leeks and a whisper into a shoe. You're lying perfectly still. The smoke from the brazier is fading now, curling toward the rafters like a ghost that knows when it has overstayed its welcome. Your blanket is damp with sweat. Your eyes are half open, not because you're awake, but because your eyelids forgot how to close all the way. Your mind is trying to settle, but the healer is not done. She presses a small pouch into your hand. It is warm. It smells like wilted flowers and vinegar. You're told to sleep with it under your chin, not under your pillow, not in your hand, under your chin, for dream direction. You don't ask what that means. In the Middle Ages, sleep was not just rest. It was a battleground, a theatre, a conversation with the divine, the demonic, or occasionally your uncle who passed away during a goat-related incident. Dreams were serious business. They were messages, warnings, prophecies, but most importantly, they were something you could influence. You just had to use the right drugs. One of the most common dream-controlling agents was mugwort. Dried and stuffed into sachets, burned on coals or steeped in wine, it was believed to open the subconscious. Monks called it herba angelorum. Herbalists called it the dream root. Everyone else called it that thing that makes you sweat and see dogs wearing clothes. You're beginning to feel it now. That strange internal float. The space between sleep and something else. Your limbs are numb. Your face is warm. Your thoughts are drifting toward the taste of old plums for reasons you cannot explain. The sachet under your chin is working. Another favourite was lettuce. Not the mild kind found in salads, but wild lettuce, boiled into a dark syrup and served in small wooden cups before bed. It dulled the senses and encouraged dream stillness, a state in which the sleeper remained aware inside their own dream. Lucid dreaming, or full-body sleep paralysis, depending on the dosage and the phase of the moon. For those seeking answers from beyond, there was dream wine, a concoction of aged red wine steeped with lavender, valerian root, mint, and a dried frog heart. Yes, an actual frog heart. The wine was drunk in silence, often after a full day of fasting and spiritual preparation. The drinker was expected to sleep facing east. If done correctly, they would dream of who they would marry, or which goat to avoid, or whether they were about to be cursed. Useful stuff. You turn slightly on your mat. The air feels heavier. A bell rings in the distance. You're not sure if it is real or internal. Either way, you're still awake. So someone hands you a charm. It's a coin, wrapped in cloth, tied with string, infused with wax and something that smells like fennel. You're told to place it beneath your tongue before sleep, just for a minute. It will draw the vision closer. You do as instructed. It tastes like an old book and roasted onion. Your jaw tingles. You start to hear wind where there is none. Many dream rituals involve positioning. Sleeping on your right side was believed to invite good visions. Sleeping on your left side was considered risky. That was where the devils came. If you snored, it was assumed you were rejecting the dreams being offered. If you slept with your mouth open, it was believed something might enter. People stitched tiny pouches of nettles and rue into their collars to prevent that sort of thing. Some monasteries practiced group dreaming. Monks would drink an herbal tea together and sleep in rows, heads aligned toward the altar. In the morning, they would compare visions. If 3 or more dreamed of the same thing, it was considered divine instruction. If one dreamed of cheese with legs, he was assigned extra fasting. You begin to dream now, or at least you think you do. A wheel spins in the sky. A crow speaks in French. Your feet are missing, then found again. You're told to listen to the soup. You wake up sweating. You fall back asleep instantly. Some medieval sleepers took stronger measures. Opium-laced pastes were smeared on the temples to induce deeper sleep. These often resulted in comas, but when they didn't, the dreams were described in detail. Floating cities, angelic choirs, a talking fish who explains the meaning of life and then explodes into flowers. There were dream candles, made with beeswax infused with rose oil and wormwood, and burned for exactly 13 minutes. Too short and the dreams wouldn't come. Too long and you risked inviting something else in. One 14th century text warns against leaving the flame unattended, lest a spirit be drawn that should remain in silence. Peasants used simpler methods. A bowl of cold water placed beneath the bed. A clove of garlic under the tongue. A lock of hair tied with string and placed beneath the left heel. All to shape the mind during sleep. All to prevent the terrifying possibility that you might dream of something unimportant. You shift again. The pouch under your chin has slipped. You catch a whiff of something sweet. Your mind begins to spiral. You feel yourself standing in a field, then flying, then holding a shoe filled with light. You laugh, in the dream, possibly out loud. No one responds. Some healers claimed they could enter your dream. Using incense, humming, and certain herbs burned near your head, they would sync their own sleep with yours. This was known as shadow travelling. It was rarely successful, but the patient usually woke up feeling slightly less alone. You're far gone now. Your breath is steady. Your limbs twitch with purpose. The air smells of herbs and burnt linen. The night stretches on. You have no idea where you are, but you're not alone. The charm has worked, and in the morning you'll need something much stronger than tea to come back. You never expected your battlefield injuries to be treated with powdered moss and a liquid that smells like fermented goat feet. But here you are, lying on a slanted wooden table, while a man who may or may not be licensed in anything sharpens a bronze blade over an open flame. Before you can protest, he offers you something he calls holy water to calm your nerves. You drink it because your nerves are, in fact, not calm. Seconds later, your ears are ringing, your teeth are humming, and the ceiling appears to be melting into the walls. The blade hovers above you like an iron buzzard. The holy water, it turns out, is half rainwater and half opium steeped in wormwood, with a generous splash of ale for flavour. This is medicine in the Middle Ages. Drugs in medieval Europe weren't tucked away behind pharmacy counters or tested in sterile labs. They were brewed in smoky apothecaries, fermented in monastery gardens, or sold by wandering physicers with suspiciously toothless smiles. Poppy, henbane, mandrake, belladonna, hemlock, cannabis, and even mouldy bread were fair game if they could make you feel less pain, or see fewer demons, or more demons. That depended entirely on the dosage, which was usually guessed. Apothecaries and monks wrote their recipes in cryptic Latin scribbles that even they sometimes forgot how to read. Sometimes they prescribed ground mummy powder, imported at a high price from Egypt, because nothing says healing like snorting ancient royalty. Pain relief was less about comfort and more about preventing you from screaming loud enough to summon God. Soldiers were regularly sedated with concoctions known as dwale, a medieval anesthetic cocktail that might include lettuce juice, bile, vinegar, hemlock, wild lettuce, and poppy juice, all simmered together and ladled into your mouth by a man wearing a crucifix and a worried expression. The dosage was everything. Too little, and you felt every slice. Too much, and you became a statue. Not a metaphorical statue, an actual rigor mortis never wake up again statue. And then there was the curious business of battlefield stimulants, because sometimes you didn't need to be calm, you needed to be completely unhinged and unaware that your leg was currently not attached to your body. Enter the medieval version of an energy drink, a syrup made from boiled nettles, spiced wine, and powdered fly agaric mushrooms. Soldiers drank it before charges to become temporarily invincible, or so they believed. In reality, they just couldn't feel their feet and occasionally hallucinated that the enemy was a dragon made of bread. Not all drugs were taken willingly. Some were applied as part of religious rituals meant to exorcise illness, which was often considered a spiritual infestation. If you were caught writhing with fever and foaming at the mouth, you might be given an enema of soot, wine, and herbs while monks chanted over your twitching body. The soot was symbolic. The wine was medicinal. The chanting was for morale. No one knew if it worked, but if you survived, it was a miracle. If not, they at least tried to clean your insides for the afterlife. One of the most beloved cure-alls was theriac, a medicinal paste that originally began as an antidote for snake venom and over time ballooned into a 64-ingredient sludge that included opium, myrrh, cinnamon, viper flesh, and occasionally bits of precious stones. It aged like wine and was considered more valuable the longer it sat in a jar. Apothecaries would display their oldest batch in elaborate glass containers like vintage brandy. People believed it could cure the plague, depression, poison, indigestion, heartbreak, and maybe taxes if rubbed in the right place. The fact that it was 10% opium probably helped with the popularity. But even the most revered medieval treatments came with consequences. Long-term opium use caused tooth rot, chronic constipation, hallucinations, and eventually a slow decline into what was known as melancholic fog, a condition where you simply wandered off one day and forgot to come back. Cannabis, when used improperly, was said to invite demons into the mind. Belladonna dilated the pupils and made everything feel floaty and wrong. Mandrake root was considered so dangerously magical that people refused to dig it up themselves, instead tying it to dogs and letting the poor animal yank it out. If the dog survived, you had a usable drug. If not, you had a funeral and a cautionary tale. Drugs weren't just for the sick. They were also recreational, especially among nobles who had the time and money to spend entire afternoons in opium haze or fly agaric tea ceremonies. These were not your modern tea parties. These were sit in a dark room until you stopped screaming social events. Some nobles mixed wine with hashish and then wandered their estates having prophetic visions about crop yields and whether the moon was judging them. Others consumed small doses of belladonna to give themselves that fashionable wide-eyed, glassy stare that was apparently the height of beauty. Side effects included nausea, sensitivity to light, and accidental candle fires. Medical texts from the period reveal a shocking enthusiasm for applying drugs to nearly any body part, including the eyes, ears, and even more intimate regions. One popular treatment for headaches involved grinding poppy seeds into a paste and smearing it directly onto the temples. Another recommended shoving a garlic clove soaked in vinegar up the nose to relieve melancholy. If that didn't cheer you up, a second clove was advised. If you complained after that, your diagnosis upgraded to demonic possession. The black market for drugs was also thriving. Not all herbalists were licensed. Many were simply skilled at growing things that made you feel funny. Travelling salesmen peddled everything from dried mushrooms to ground beetles in secret stalls just outside the city gates. Some even sold fake relics infused with hallucinogens, claiming they would allow you to see visions of saints. They usually did. Sometimes they were also followed by visions of giant chickens or talking bread. It depended on the moon phase, or how gullible you were. And amidst all this pharmacological chaos, the church maintained a complicated relationship with drugs. On one hand, they were suspicious of anything that altered the mind and might invite sin or heresy. On the other hand, monasteries were often the biggest producers of medicinal concoctions, growing poppies and distilling wine-based tinctures in their gardens. The line between medicine and magic was thin. Thinner still when the monk treating you also claimed to speak with angels and recommended applying eagle dung to your wounds while you recited the Psalms. It's important to note that most medieval people didn't have a detailed understanding of chemistry. They followed humoral theory, which divided the body into 4 fluids: blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile. Illness was a matter of imbalance. Drugs were used to heat, cool, moisten, or dry you out accordingly. If you had too much phlegm, you might be given pepper and mustard to heat you up. If you were too dry, a mixture of honey and cow's milk might be forced into your nostrils. If you survived, you were cured. If you didn't, you were buried with a sign that read, "Too much yellow bile." So the next time you complain about the taste of cough syrup or the side effects of aspirin, take comfort in the fact that no one is prescribing you a garlic vinegar nose plug or bleeding you with leeches while whispering prayers to Saint Apollonia. The medieval pharmacy was equal parts garden, gamble, and hallucinatory nightmare. It was an age where painkillers could cure you or launch your soul into orbit, where one man's medicine was another man's permanent nap, and where the most common side effect of treatment was questioning your grip on reality while chewing on viper jerky laced with opium and holy water. Once the dried snake powder and moldy bread poultices had finished doing whatever they were supposed to do to your organs, the next medieval miracle awaited. This one came bottled, usually in glass if you were fancy, or in a wooden flask if you were not. The label might have read something inspiring like Elixir of the Black Bile, or perhaps just had a hand-scrawled skull on it. Regardless, you drank it. And then your stomach begged for forgiveness. Among the strangest and most popular categories of medieval drugs were concoctions made from actual mummies. Real ones. Ground-up corpses shipped from Egypt, pulverized into brownish dust, and sold in apothecaries across Europe as medicine. Known as mumia, this ancient human jerky was believed to cure headaches, internal bleeding, bruises, and apparently your fear of accidentally consuming ancient royalty. Kings, popes and surgeons gobbled it up. Not figuratively. They literally spread it on bread like some sort of pharaoh pâté. A medical snack with extra curses. And if eating mummies didn't work, you could always snort them. Yes, snorting powdered mummy was also common. The nose was seen as a useful portal to the soul, and what better way to heal your spiritual imbalances than by blasting powdered corpse up your nostrils before church? Meanwhile, if you were more rural and couldn't afford imported mummified kings, you could always forage for your own medicinal nightmares. Mandrake root was a favourite, shaped like a human, said to scream when pulled from the ground. People believed it was fatal to hear the scream, so they tied the root to a dog and made the dog pull it out. The dog didn't make it. But you did get your hallucinogenic root, now infused with superstition, canine tragedy, and the vague taste of remorse. Of course, mandrake had many uses. It was a sedative, an aphrodisiac, a magical protection charm, a treatment for demonic possession, and in all likelihood, a strong enough dose made you feel like you'd traded your spine for a garden hose and your teeth for bees. But again, that was considered a sign it was working. Another favourite was theriac, a mythical cure-all originally invented by ancient Greeks, then updated by medieval Europeans into a strange brown goop made from as many as 60 ingredients. This included cinnamon, myrrh, saffron, opium, and bits of venomous animals. Theriac was basically a medieval smoothie designed by a pharmacist who had suffered a nervous breakdown. And it cost a fortune. Apothecaries would store it in elaborately labelled jars and let it age like fine wine, sometimes for decades, because nothing says health tonic like fermented reptile paste in a dusty jar. But perhaps the most horrifying of the medieval drug aisle came in the form of something called tincture of skull. This involved taking the crushed bone of an executed criminal, soaking it in alcohol, and using it to treat epilepsy. The logic? The soul of the criminal, now infused in the skull, could pass on its violent energy to jolt your brain back into proper function. Which is another way of saying they gave you haunted alcohol and hope for the best. Medicinal cannibalism wasn't just a fringe practice, it was respected, institutionalized, marketed. Monks drank blood of the recently executed. Royal physicians recommended fat from the thighs of the freshly hanged as topical treatment. Apothecaries kept shelves lined with dried organs, pulverized human remains, and glass vials of curiously viscous liquids that sometimes twitched. And let's not forget poppy. Opium was a star player in medieval medicine, but nobody really understood dosage. A small amount might help you sleep, a large amount might help you sleep forever. The line between healing and funeral preparation was surprisingly thin, especially when your physician measured by pinch and kept his ingredients in unlabeled bags that smelled like basement mould. These drugs weren't just taken during crises, they were part of everyday health routines. Some people took serpent oil for strength, others swore by bat blood to protect against rheumatism. Toad vomit? Great for colds. Deer brain cooked in wine? That's your go-to for memory loss. If it bled, oozed, croaked or stung, someone somewhere boiled it into soup and called it medicine. Even medical textbooks from the era were more like cookbooks for dark magic. They listed ailments, treatments, ingredients, and helpful illustrations that looked like they'd been drawn by a sleep-deprived goblin. To treat melancholy, swallow crushed emeralds, soak your feet in vinegar and whisper to a goat. This was advice people paid for, in silver. Still, there was a method to the madness. Sort of. The four humours, blood, phlegm, yellow bile and black bile, had to be balanced. So if you were feeling sluggish, it was probably your fault for hoarding too much phlegm. Time to purge, through vomiting, leeches, enemas, or a drink made from burnt hedgehog and cider vinegar. Add a sprinkle of ground pearls if you wanted to impress guests. And while leeches technically weren't a drug, they were considered a medical tool and occasionally came pickled in jars alongside all the herbs and powders. Some doctors even recommended swallowing live leeches to treat intestinal blockages. This usually worked. The patient's intestines were permanently blocked. With leeches, all of it, from the mummy toast to the opium snail smoothies, formed a vast medieval pharmaceutical tapestry, stitched together with folklore, desperation, and a fearless approach to trial and error. People lived in a world where illness meant uncertainty, and medicine was an experiment with consequences, sometimes miraculous, often extremely moist. And as you stumble away from the apothecary stall, mouth tingling from whatever tincture you just ingested, it's time to accept the truth. In the Middle Ages, medicine wasn't about understanding the body. It was about distracting it long enough that you either forgot you were sick or joined the great herbalist in the sky. And if your brain somehow survived that medieval pharmacy tour without leaking out your ears, congratulations. You're officially tougher than a 14th century monk on wormwood tea. Let me know in the comments which historical horror show you'd like to suffer through next. And if you're still conscious, check out the other videos on the channel for more soothing tales of ancient misery. Your sleep deserves nothing less than total mental exhaustion.